In today's show, no news is good news for Damian Lillard and the Portland Trail Blazers. If the team is still committed to building a winner around Dame, how are they going to approach free agency? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen. It's coming at you every single weekday, Monday through Friday, so make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, it's truly no news is good news for the Portland Trail Blazers. Joe Cronin issued a statement saying the team is still trying to build a winner around Damian Lillard. In this case, nothing's changed, and that's a good sign, at least for now. So, if that's the plan, what we'll talk about in the rest of the show is how this team will approach free agency. It begins in earnest at 3 p.m. on Friday out here in Portland, 6 Eastern time, and so the middle of the afternoon for us. If they're going to build a winner around Dame, the path to do that is in free agency. So how will they approach it? Starts with Jerami Grant, and then what else can they do to get better in a hurry? Because that seems to still, after all this, be the plan. But let's start with the no news that was indeed good news. Yesterday, on Monday, Damian Lillard met with yesterday, as I'm recording this, you're listening to Wednesday, June 28th show. So on Monday, Damian Lillard met with and his agent, Aaron Goodwin, met with Joe Cronin. Dame back from Paris. The Blazers had, he said, I want to play with vets. I'm done. That's enough for 19-year-olds. If the team is building, that route's not my route. Then the Blazers went and selected 2 rookies in the first round of the draft, have not traded for a veteran, have added 2 players under the age of 24, thanks in large part to Chris Murray being 23, their pick in the 23rd, with the 23rd selection in the draft. So there was some speculation, I think some fair speculation, that this was the meeting that Damian Lillard was going to request a trade. Instead, no news is good news. Joe Cronin, following that meeting, issued a statement to, journalists who cover the team, reporters who cover the team is probably the right word. And it reads, I met with Dame and Aaron Goodwin this afternoon. We had a great dialogue. We remain committed to building a winner around Dame. Okay. Cool. Joe Cronin has said some version of this 10 or 12 times. He said exactly this right after the draft. He keeps saying this every chance he gets. He keeps saying this. We're committed to building a winner around Dame. At some point, you got to do it. It's show, don't tell season. To me, this statement rings hollow. The statement itself rings hollow. But the no news is good. The no news is good. If you're rooting for Damian Lillard to still be on the team, he is certainly giving the Blazers another opportunity to make good on their promise, it seems. I'll be honest. I have some tinfoil hat theories about this meeting that I am not going to share here because it's just irresponsible speculation. But if you know me personally, so yeah, I will share some irresponsible speculation. Send me a text message. But no news is good news. It really is. It really is, because the fact that there wasn't reporting coming out of this meeting that says, Damian Lillard has decided it's time for him to move on, or Damian Lillard has requested he be traded, or Damian Lillard has given the Blazers marching orders to trade him to these 3 teams, or whatever it might be. It's probably 2 teams, y'all. But it's the lack of news, the lack of just sort of like concrete, here's what Dame said type of reporting is unequivocally good news. That is assuming if you're rooting for like the Blazers to blow it up, just wait, I guess, or like be upset. I guess those are your 2 options. But if you're rooting for Dame to remain a Blazer, then this is good news because he has not requested a trade. And this was the meeting that there was some speculation that he would. In fact, according to Brian Windhorst of ESPN, who was on Get Up, its show on ESPN, on Tuesday morning, said that Damian Lillard appears to not want to necessarily put pressure on this team. He wants to give them a chance to make good on the promise they keep making. So I think, the lack of sort of concrete anything than just like a kind of another Joe Cronin reiterating what he said a million times, solid. But you got to do something. You got to do something. This is the action portion of the program. Words are great, but I do not believe that Damian Lillard is going to be comfortable with, we're committed to building a team around you and then no action. Like, I think this is, I think a very reasonable, not tinfoil Hattie Reed would be, Dame says, great. I want to be here. I've said that a bunch. You want me to be here. You've said that a bunch. Like this remains the stance of both parties. I haven't sort of worn out my patience yet, and I'm willing to give you a chance over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it might be, as they head into free agency, which is going to heat up sort of the transaction game in the league as teams reconfigure their rosters and a new league year begins, et cetera, et cetera. As you get into that, as free agency begins, Dame is willing to be patient and see what they do. The problem is, and this is something I've mentioned on the podcast, my everydayers will know it. Shout out to become an everyday listener so you won't miss stuff like this. But I mentioned heading into this offseason, heading into the draft, is like one of the great unknowns is like what level of competitive is Dame comfortable with? That is just like something we are never going to be able to know until it happens. There will be a line and we will see where, what side of the line Dame ends up on. But like Dame's level of comfort with how competitive they are remains a huge unknown in all of this. But they got to do something. But whatever they do, they need to heed the words of Dwayne Michael Carter. That's Lil Wayne. Real G's move in silence like lasagna. Blazers have had too much public posturing, too much of their business out in the open, too much of we're going to do this and Dame wants this out for all of us to see. A lot of that, I will say the majority of it even, is coming from Damian Lillard. He has put a lot of public pressure when he has had opportunities to do so, and then he has gone out of his way to take opportunities to do so, to put public pressure on the Blazers. And whatever direction they go, whether they're going to eventually trade Damian Lillard here in 3 weeks, or whether they're going to, thread the perfect needle and build a competitive enough team that he is totally comfortable and on board and plays out the string with them, it can't be out in the open. If they're going to trade Damian Lillard, they can't have it be public that he only wants to go to Miami and Brooklyn. I kind of think we already know that. But if there are mystery third teams, if Boston or Philly or whatever in the Dame trade world, like step in there, or some other mystery team, it behooves the Blazers to not have that be a public thing and lose their leverage and lose some of their negotiating power. Because it's like, not that Dame he doesn't have a no trade clause, but he's going to have a lot of say in where he goes if they decide to go that direction. It needs to be quiet. Real G's move in silence like lasagna. Lil Wayne was right. And if they don't go that route, and if they build a winner, they need to not have it so, we already know, if you're listening to this program or just someone who follows the league, the Blazers basically have to trade Anthony Simons. But it can't be out there that obvious because you lose some of, it can't be publicly negotiated. No more public posturing, no more public negotiation. It has to be quiet. It has to happen behind the scenes. And I think one of the good things that came out of this meeting unequivocally was that, Chris Haynes, the Dame whisperer, a good friend of Damian Lillard and a guy who gets all the Dame news, didn't have the play-by-play, beat-by-beat of this story, coming on his Twitter feed immediately when it happened. He didn't immediately put that out on Twitter. It didn't immediately happen. Haynes tweeted out the statement like plenty of other reporters. It's got to happen quietly. It's better for both sides. It's better for the Goodwins, which is Dame's agency. It's better for Dame. It's better for the Blazers. Whatever direction they go, doing it quietly now after this has been so out in the open, and quite frankly, it's kind of worn people out by how out in the open it is. They have to make a move. And it needs to be at least a relative surprise for us, because the Blazers lose all their leverage if it continues to be so obvious and so open and so out there. Real G's move in silence like lasagna. They got to do something, though, and step one is signing Jerami Grant. Let's talk about signing Jerami Grant. That's what the Blazers need to do if they're going to go this route beginning Friday. They absolutely need to do it. Let's talk about what that's going to look like in the second segment. But before we do that, I want to tell you about championship teams and the good folks at eBay Motors know a thing or two about a championship team. They know it's about making sure every player is a perfect fit. Same when it comes to your vehicle, every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts or accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage. Look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride! eBay Motors, eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. All right. If you're going to build a winner around Damian Lillard, step one is signing Jerami Grant. It's pretty simple. Re-sign Jerami Grant. Jerami Grant is a unrestricted free agent this offseason. It's one of the best free agents on the market. He was pretty productive for the Blazers. I think his production tailed off at the end of the year, and then he was hurt and missed a bunch of games, and they held him out when he was going to come back. Unclear how many games he could have played at the end, but a bunch is my guess. He could have played a bunch of games at the end of the season, and they just chose to hold him out. But the Blazers offered him a 4-year, $114 million contract during the regular season. That was the maximum extension that he was allowed to sign during the regular season, and at the time he declined it. That is according to reporting from Jason Quick of The Athletic. Jerami just said, we'll wait. Okay, we will. I want to wait. It's like, oh, darn, he turned down a max contract extension. Well, it's because he could always get more money in the offseason. Once he hits free agency, so like he doesn't re-sign, he doesn't sign extension, he waits until he becomes a free agent at 3:01 p.m. on Friday afternoon. He'll hit free agency. The new league year will begin, and he will be eligible to sign with any team, but he will also be eligible to sign with the Blazers for a larger contract with bigger raises for more years. More money, more years. So higher raises, higher years. His max is like a number I'm not even going to say, because when you say it, it scares people. He's not going to sign for $45 million. Like, chill. He's not a max guy. But he is going to command likely north of 4 for 114. If the Blazers already offered him 4 for 114, he turned it down. The starting point is like more than that. According to Matt Moore of the Action Network, he has heard that Jerami Grant and the Blazers already have an agreement for a contract north of $120 million. And if you've been listening to this particular show, I've been guessing that Jerami Grant signed something like, because you can add a 5th year in free agency. He could only sign 4 during the regular season, but 5th in free agency. I've been guessing, just kind of based on the reporting that's out there and my sort of knowledge of how this stuff works. I'm a tea leaves guy. My tea leaves contract has been 5 for 148, which is too much money to pay Jerami Grant, but the Blazers backed themselves into this situation, and now they got to pony up. Not my money. But it is too much money to pay Jerami Grant. I think he'll be slightly overpaid to begin that contract and then deeply overpaid at the end of it, but that just kind of happens. And if they're going to be good, and they want to be good, the guy that Damian Lillard wanted them to go trade for, they traded for, and he was really productive as a shooter and kind of misused as a defender, but I think he can be a better defender if they use him a little bit better. Yeah, he's going to command $30 million. Somebody's going to give it to him. He might go back to Detroit if the Blazers balk at it. He might go to Houston if the Blazers balk at it. So give him the money. The Blazers have his bird rights. They can go over the salary cap. Easy peasy. There's nothing tricky with signing Jerami Grant. Nothing tricky. Sort of. A side note before we get into the sort of, you better believe the Blazers have pretty much their moves mapped out. Like everyone, all of these deals that are going to come out when free agency starts, and it's really fun. It's going to be like, there's going to be a bunch of deals that come out in the first 5 minutes. I mean, maybe the people will wait this year because teams have been punished in the past for announcing deals like 3 minutes into free agency. It's like, how did you agree to an elaborate sign and trade in 180 seconds? So maybe they'll wait. But everyone in the league knows who's signing where and trades that are coming. Like it's a league where everyone is breaking the rules and the league is okay with it. It's fine. Collusion is like a part of the sport. Teams make deals ahead of time. So like you better believe that Dame kind of got the Joe Cronin Trailblazers vision, and there's a reason that he's being patient, or if a generous read is the reason that he's being patient with him is because they laid out a compelling vision. Compelling vision has to start with signing Jerami Grant. And it's like a thing you have to do, and it's fine. The sorta that I mentioned, like the reason why it's like it's not complicated. It's sorta. The sorta is that in order to convince Damian Lillard that he wants to be part of the plan, because I still think they have to do that, right? Like I don't think anything's changed. They want to build a winner around Dame. They haven't done that yet, so they got to do that. And then Dame will be like, "Yeah, cool. Let's go. Let's ride. Like this is where I want to be. Thanks for checking enough boxes for me. Let's go." So, step one is you have to re-sign Jerami Grant in order to appease Dame's, in order to keep Dame involved, right? Like that, you have to re-sign veteran help. You can't let him walk. But if you give Jerami Grant a fat contract and then Dame decides to ask for a trade anyways, that's a little messy. like you have to do the first thing before the big decision comes. In order to inform the big decision, you have to do the first thing, and that can get a little messy. Like I think there is some risk there. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it makes sense for the Blazers to re-sign Jerami Grant regardless. Now, if they're going to go young, I think it makes more sense to re-sign Jerami Grant to something like 3 for $90. Give him a 3-year deal for $90 million. And then, which would make him more tradable, more appealing as a trade partner. You don't want him to let him walk for nothing, right? You traded Josh Hart and you traded Larry Nance to get this beautiful trade exception that perfectly lined up to acquire Jerami Grant, and you had to trade away a future pick to get him. And like this was the CJ trade. I said trade Josh Hart. You traded CJ McCollum and got and acquired Josh Hart in a first round pick. You eventually got Josh Hart got up out of there, but this is the end of the CJ trade. Is CJ McCollum out, Larry Nance out, Jerami Grant in. You can't really let him walk for nothing, because then then maybe you just turn CJ McCollum into Chris Murray. I think the transitive property of trades is kind of BS, but there's some truth to it, right? There's like a sunk costs fallacy, and there's like just the reality of sunk costs. Like you kind of while it screws you up a little bit and can maybe make you make decisions you otherwise wouldn't have. In this case, the Blazers need to sign Jerami Grant regardless. It's just if you're going to keep Dame, I guess a longer contract makes sense. Like I would not, if I'm a team, want to give Jerami Grant like a 4-year, $125 million contract, but you might have to. But if you are not going to keep Dame, but you don't kind of know that yet, hedging and giving Jerami Grant a 3-year, $90 million contract, if that is palatable for him, if he'll come back at that price tag, could make sense even if you go young, because it makes him tradable. And I think you just want a tradable asset. You just want you want Jerami Grant to either be on your team because he's going to be helpful, or you want to be able to say like, hey, play a little bit, and then in February we'll find you another place to go and we'll get something back in return, and like it'll work out for everyone. Step one, a dicey but obvious one, is re-sign Jerami Grant. What else are they going to do, and how are they going to be able to do it? I want to talk about the rest of the Blazers' approach to free agency to close the show. Join me in that third segment, won't you? Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked on Blazers. Step one is sign Jerami Grant. Step two is do everything else. I think step two has to be, if you're going to like build this winner around Dame, is trade Anthony Simons for a forward or a center, but a forward is probably like a dude who can play power forward or a little bit of center would be ideal. But if it's a dude who can play a little bit of small forward and power forward, that's fine too. Like they have a pretty gaping hole at 3. Like they just don't have a capable starting small forward in the league right now. You could argue Jerami Grant is that, but okay, cool. I don't like that's not. Some have argued that. You will not hear me say that on the show, but sure, okay, fine. Slide him down. Who plays the 4? It's like, Chris Murray, okay, that's not a team that wins a bunch of games. You just can't rely on rookies like that. It's just the reality of it. You might be able to eventually, but I don't think you want to pencil that in on day one. The Blazers they need another forward of some flavor. Is there do the Raptors finally balk and give up OG for less than they've been asking for a year and a half? Probably not. So I don't think it's OG Anunoby, and it's hard to know who else is out there. Is it Kelly Oubre on the mid-level money or whatever it is? That's it. Not my Huckleberry, but sure, at least someone who could fill that role to some extent. It's going to be tough, but I think you want to flip Ant for a tall person. That's step 2. We'll talk about that later in this week. I want to focus on free agency here, but I want to acknowledge that that's probably step 2. And step 3 is how they approach free agency. But part of how they approach free agency is just the reality of what they got to work with. So I want to offer a little free agency primer on how the Blazers are able to approach free agency. Again, it begins on Friday. You were listening to Wednesday's show, so take a deep breath. We will get there together. We'll have a couple other shows beforehand, and then we'll have a 6th show this week after the first day of free agency because I love y'all, and I'm going to crank it out because it's a fun week in the NBA. But the Blazers are not a salary cap team, and they do not have a path to being a salary cap team. If you just include the guaranteed contracts plus the rookies, so the guys who are guaranteed plus Scoot Henderson and Chris Murray's salary slots, assuming they sign for 125, for the normal money. I won't get too far into the weeds for the normal money that rookies do. So that means no Trent Watford, no Jabari Walker, no Jonathan Williams. That's your boy Nate. No Kevin Knox. Those dudes walk. You renounce the rights to Cam Reddish, renounce the rights to Matisse Thybulle. You're just talking guaranteed money. And Jerami Grant's tax hold, guaranteed money, the rookies and Jerami Grant's cap hold. It's over $143 million. Jerami Grant's cap hold is $31 million. Say you sign him to a sweetheart deal of $29 million in that first year, $28 million in the first year, and it climbs from there. Let's even be really generous and say $27 million in the first year. That gets you down to about $139 million. Well, the salary cap is 136, so you're still over the cap. You're still over the cap, and that's without Trendon, without Jabari, without Nate Williams. Who knows if Nate Williams will be on the team? It's without Ryan Rupert, the second-round pick. It's without the holds the charges the team gets for having empty roster spots, which is part of how the calculation works for how much money you have to work with in summer. Is if you have open roster spots, there is a charge for open roster spots. They just don't have a meaningful path. If they renounce everybody, they could have salary cap space, but that's everybody's gone. Matisse is gone, Cam Reddish is gone, Jerami Grant is gone, Trent Watford's gone, Jabari Walker's gone. That whole crew's gone, and you're in the $6 or $8 million in cap space by my rough math. I think it's a little over 5. That's not enough cap space to sign a meaningful player. It just makes much more sense for them to be an over-the-cap team. So if you are an over-the-cap team, you can sign free agents who have their bird rights. The Blazers have bird rights on Jerami Grant. That's Larry Bird for those of you history buffs out there. Sign Jerami Grant. You can go over the salary cap to re-sign him. You can go over the salary cap to re-sign Cam Reddish and Matisse Thybulle. You have bird rights on both of those gentlemen. For Walker and Trent Watford, it's just non-guaranteed money. You can just hit their guarantee dates. In fact, a key one to watch is Kevin Knox has a $3 million contract, team option that is the trigger date is June 29th. So that's Thursday heading into free agency. We'll see what the Blazers do on that one. I'm not a big... my friends who watch the Blazers like Kevin Knox more than me. I wouldn't... I'm not really highly in favor of bringing him back, but certainly people whose basketball opinions I respect are highly in favor of it. So if you are... Cool. Check out the Thursday is the date for Knox. So the Blazers are going to be over the cap. They're going to be, but the other number to know in all of this is the luxury tax threshold. So it's $165 million. They basically just, they have to be a tax team if they're going to be good. And if ownership is unwilling to pay the tax, they're not going to be good. And that's just kind of that. I believe there's reporting from Sean Highkin, both Danny Morang have said the Blazers, if they could field a competitive team, they'd be comfortable going into the tax. They both reported that from sources that they've heard. what is the threshold of competitive? If you bring Dame back and you don't spend the tax, it's like you might as well let him walk anyways. It's just silly, stupid. But if you're already at like 145 million, if you're going to be competitive, you're going to need to push up against that 165 because you're probably going to want to bring Matisse Thybulle back regardless, and Trent Watford and Jabari Walker both in the fold. And then you're going to want to add players because you're just still a little talent poor. Like if you're going to be good, you're going to have to add other players. And if you are a team that's over the cap, you do not have cap space to sign players, but you do have a couple different vehicles. One is called the mid-level exception. The Blazers would be, they would have access at the beginning of the of free agency to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which would be $12.4 million. So they can, if they flirt with that tax line, they'll be able to use all of it. So there are some rules where if you're going to be over, you can't use the full MLE and you have to use the taxpayer MLE. But we'll get into that a little bit deeper into the show, or a little bit deeper into the offseason rather. But if they can remain below the tax, at least like to begin the offseason and before you get down the line and add minimums, they will have access to the mid-level exception. So $12.4 million contract. All teams that are above the salary cap but below the tax line have access to it. It is not like a super competitive vehicle because everyone has access to it, but it is like a good line for like mid-level, truly like the sort of mid-range fringe starter or like really good backup level money at $12 million. You could offer up to a four-year deal starting at that $12.4 million. If you use all of it, you get hard capped, and the Blazers wouldn't be able to go over about $172 million in salary at any point. So I don't think they'll use all of it, but they might because that's how you are competitive. They will also have the biannual exception, which is a similar, like it's an exception for teams that are above the salary cap line. You can use it every other year. That's why it's biannual. Teams don't use this very often because again, it triggers the hard cap, which puts a finite level on how much money you can spend. There is, that's what the Blazers comfort level in spending, we'll see, but I don't expect them to use the BAE. I do expect them to use some or all of the mid-level exception to get there. They also have a trade exception. It is from the Gary Payton trade where they sent him back to the Warriors and received Kevin Knox. It's about $8.3 million. Mid-range trade exceptions don't get used often. I would say the $8 million trade exception is like in the range where it could get used, but it's big ones that get used more often, like the one that the Blazers used to acquire Jerami Grant, which is like $25 million. That is the like size of ones that get used because they're the team that's sending out the player making $25 million. That's really appealing to them. They don't have to take anything back. It's just a straight salary dump. $8 million is not the kind of right salary range where these oftentimes these will expire just because they're not the right salary range. But if you're getting creative, you can find a way to absorb someone making $8 million in a trade. This is a vehicle to do so. It'll work. They also have a smaller one that's just like they're probably not going to use, but they could. It's like $4 million. So those are their tools. They're going to be an over-the-cap team. They're going to have the mid-level exception. Technically, they're going to have the BAE, and that would offer some sort of financial penalties, it's financial constraints, not penalties, constraints rather. They're going to re-sign Jerami Grant to something like $30 million a year. My guess is 5 for 148, the last year being a team option. Let me just throw that out there one more time, because if I get this right, it's literally it's an educated dart throw. It's a dart wearing glasses, a little dorky dart that I'm throwing. 5 for 148. Last year's team option. That's my guess officially on Jerami Grant. I assume they will bring back Matisse Thybulle. It probably makes sense to bring back Cam Reddish just because they don't have a lot of dudes his size. I wasn't really impressed with Cam Reddish by the end of his tenure with the Blazers, but he's I could see taking a swing on him. If they go young, he's definitely worth taking a flyer on. Cam Reddish's qualifying offer is like $7 million. I don't think he's going to get that money on the open market. I wouldn't be stunned if Cam Reddish signed for the minimum, but probably more than that somewhere. Like there's probably more than that money somewhere, but I wouldn't be stunned if he signs for the minimum. Matisse Thybulle will be curious what he gets. He's like an effective and useful player. He could fill in some of the Blazers like need for someone who could play a little bit of small forward, but like has some limitations on offense. I think they have the tools to be pretty good. I mentioned this on yesterday's show kind of in passing, that I think like if Dame does come back and they do trade Anthony Simons, the Blazers like have a pretty easy path to being like the 7th best team in the West and just figuring it out from there. If they do that and they like hit right in free agency, if like sign Jerami Grant, make the right mid-level signing, use the trade exception for some sort of like bench guy to bolster your depth because you desperately just need more players who could help. And Trent Watford takes a step when you bring him back. And Jabari Walker is like a useful player. Chris Murray's useful. And Scoot Henderson is like really good. I think they have like upside of being somewhere in like that 5th or 6th in the West. Is that good enough for Dame? Because if it is, if that's like one of the strange unknowns of this, if that's good enough to appease Dame, it's like, yeah, about 5th in the West, let's go for it. Then I think they can move forward threading this impossible needle. We won't know. But they got to start with signing Jerami Grant, and they got to hit free agency, which begins Friday, and those are the tools they have. Hopefully this last segment helped you kind of understand how the Blazers are going to be able to approach free agency as we head into this Friday. Tomorrow's show, we will talk about some potential mid-level exception targets. We'll talk about some possible Anthony Simons trade destinations, trade targets, and things like that. Because if they're going to go this route, let's follow them down this path. How do they get there? That's what we'll try to do the rest of the week. Come back and listen to the show everywhere you get podcasts, also on YouTube. Tell your friends about it. It's free on all platforms. I appreciate you listening. Talk to you soon.